Let's get started with today's webinar on ChatGPT in coding education. We got lots of people joining today. It's quite a hot topic, so hopefully we can share some of our insights on how to, sort of embrace ChatGPT in a way, but also strategies to sort of go against ChatGPT, or at least make sure your assignments are sort of okay. Quickly introducing myself and CodeGrade for people that don't know that. So I'm a former student and teaching assistant from the University of Amsterdam. And together with a couple of colleagues there, we founded CodeGrade, basically as a way to make our lives a bit easier. So CodeGrade is a grading platform where you can give coding assessments to students. And I'm currently CEO at CodeGrade, and you can also reach me there at Youri@codegrade.com if you have any follow-up questions. Today it won't be as much about CodeGrade itself. It will mostly be about sort of assessment design strategies. So let's have a look at what we're doing today. First, quick recap: what is ChatGPT? Probably everyone knows that already here. So then we'll quickly go into what the impact is on CS education. So as you know, ChatGPT can generate code. So how does that impact your assessment style in terms of your coding courses? We'll go over some possible responses. For instance, whether it's possible to detect ChatGPT, implementing strategies to reduce cheating and promote academic integrity, and how to build AI-proof coding assessments. And then we'll also go into adopting generative AI. So what are some tools to teach AI literacy? And then how to use ChatGPT in your teaching workflow to save time. And really exciting, we have a proof of concept of Nick Koning from the Erasmus University Rotterdam, and he's been doing some cool things with ChatGPT. So we'll let him share that, and it's very cool. So let's get started. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. My colleague Devin, who's also here somewhere, will be monitoring that and answering that. And if it's and later on, we'll also have a Q&A at the end. So let's quickly recap what ChatGPT is. So as you all may know, it's a large language model that basically produces plausible text, but it can also produce code. ChatGPT itself, currently we have 3.5 available, and GPT-4, where 3.5 is free and 4 costs like $25 a month. The output of this is not necessarily correct. It's just predicting something, but it finds most plausible. And everybody can access this through chat.openai.com, but many alternatives are also now available in the generative AI space. Google's BART just got a massive update. It's not in the EU available at the moment, but you can of course use that through a VPN. And within OpenAI, if you are on the Plus version, things like plugins are also becoming available, where you can start to browse the code, which is really cool. And of course, API access, so you can also integrate it within your tools as well. And we'll see that later when Nick showcases his proof of concept. So let's take that as a base. That basically means every student has access to this tool, and they can use it to also solve their coding assignments and many other things. So let's quickly dive into what the impact is on CS education. So ChatGPT can generate code, and it can pass standardized tests for many subjects. And this includes the 2022 AP Computer Science A test. For people outside of the US, this is like a standardized coding test that's taken by high school students. It's sort of introduction programming in Java. And ChatGPT can pass that without many problems. We've also tried out ChatGPT on some of our own coding assignments, and we'll see that in a little bit as well. I'll demo that. And it's pretty good at solving them, especially GPT-4, and also providing sort of the correct code to students without them having to do much work. And that's a new risk for academic integrity for you as a teacher, of course, but also for us as a company. And this raised some ethical concerns regarding academic integrity. So what if my students just solve this assignment using ChatGPT, and they don't learn anything? And actually some early studies, this is very wide range, but early studies suggest that a lot of students are already using ChatGPT. Of course, that doesn't mean they use it to cheat, but they could. But in general, like almost everyone who has a job is using ChatGPT in some way. If you look at the adoption numbers, the amount of people using these kinds of tools, it's pretty crazy. Something we've basically never seen before. And the reason for that is that first of all, it's very powerful, but it's also really easy to use. So let me quickly demo what ChatGPT did when we run it on one of our intro to programming assignments. So here we have a intro to programming assignment from our introduction to Python course. Has a nice task description and then also some example usage. And then the first thing we can just do is give ChatGPT a prompt, and this is 3.5. Reverse engineer this and give me the code for this program, and I'll just give it to them. And then ChatGPT comes up with a Python program that solves it. And they give us some nice helpful suggestions, save it in Fibonacci.py, run it using this command, and it will prompt you, and it will work. But then in this assignment description, it should start with 1-1. So I spot this right here, so I can give it another prompt. It should start with 1-1, not 0-1. And then fortunately, it apologizes, so that's great. And then now it corrects the code. It starts with 1-1. Then another thing it doesn't do yet, doesn't do error handling. So I ask it to do that as well. And then we have sort of a program that works correctly. Maybe not the nicest implementation, but it does work. I think I have another example here. So another example where you just put in the assignment description, nothing else. And it will come up with sort of a different similar-ish solution. And again, it will give us some helpful text around this as well. So especially for introduction to Python, pretty powerful. It definitely works. And then here I have another one where I use GPT-4, and it does basically the same. But as you can see, there are small things that it does wrong, like it doesn't read the assignment that careful. So as a student, you will have to sort of do something with this code to get this to full points. But yeah, this is pretty insane, of course. But then again, if you compare this to maybe what they would do without ChatGPT, you can Google Fibonacci algorithm and then go to the first Stack Overflow answer, and you get like basically the same code. So in that sense, it's also not that different from how it was before, except that it's a lot more user-friendly, I guess, than Googling and using Stack Overflow. What we also saw quickly already is there's quite some limitations to what ChatGPT generates, and especially as it gets more complex, at the moment at least, the assignment will not be solved correctly and needs some work to get it to work correctly. And if you look sort of what's happening in the whole space, like Stack Overflow banned using ChatGPT because there's so many wrong answers as well. And there was someone from Princeton, a professor, they called ChatGPT a bullshit generator. And that's kind of what it is. It's just taking all of the data on the internet and producing something that's plausible, but not necessarily correct. So there are definitely some strategies we can use to exploit this in a sense. So we've seen this quick demo, and we've seen that it's actually really good. So what kind of response should we then give to this? First of all, let's talk a bit about detecting if ChatGPT is used. So there's definitely a lot of sort of fuzz around, can we detect ChatGPT? And we have more and more ChatGPT text detectors popping up, and also big plagiarism software companies that start to do stuff with this. And OpenAI has their classifier, but they also mention a lot of limitations. And especially for coding educations, some of these limitations are, well, these are general. It should not be used as a primary decision-making tool, which makes sense. In general, plagiarism detection, even non-ChatGPT plagiarism detection is not necessarily a primary decision-making tool. You always have to use sort of your other things you see. But the main thing they say is it should be used for English text, and it's unreliable on code. And that makes sense because, you know, the coded outputs, it's inherently predictable, and very predictable text cannot be reliably identified. And code assignments inherently yields predictable and homogeneous answers. So these ChatGPT detectors, or these plagiarism companies that focus a lot on this, it's not going to help us when we teach coding to people. So we have to come up with something else. For smaller tasks, though, ChatGPT code is quite uniform, so they tend to come up with very similar solutions that always have something weird around them. So they are sort of easy to catch via sort of normal code plagiarism detectors. So if you have a lot of students and multiple students are using ChatGPT, they're likely going to get plagiarism with each other. Because for simple assignments, or not very simple, but the relatively simple assignments, the answers that ChatGPT produces are very similar. And we also have to realize here that students that cheat typically don't really take the time or have gathered enough skill to improve the code. So for sort of all of the easy plagiarism cases where the students are 5 minutes before the deadline, they pop it into ChatGPT and then hope to solve the assignment in time. Likely that will still be quite difficult. But of course, that doesn't catch us everything per se. And we sort of, in our opinion, we see two different paths. So we have introductory courses where we likely want to reduce cheating, and then more advanced coding courses where we want to embrace generative AI in some kind of way. And I always sort of like to compare this to a calculator in mathematics. When you're just learning simple maths, you probably shouldn't use a calculator. So you should learn, you know, how to do division and multiply, because later on that will help you a lot. And you can say a similar approach for introduction to programming. Like, before you even know what a variable is, you probably should learn that before you use tools like ChatGPT. But then once you have that basic skill, you start using the calculator and use that to go way more advanced than you could without in much shorter time. So for more advanced courses, we want to look into ways where we can embrace generative AI, where maybe it's allowed to use ChatGPT, but we make the assignment more difficult and we let students go way further with the knowledge they gathered in those introductory courses. So let's dive deeper into this introductory course scheme where we want to reduce cheating in general, and we want to maybe limit the use of ChatGPT, especially in those first few courses. So the first thing and the main thing, and this is not necessarily just because of ChatGPT, but just in general, we want to reduce cheating by engaging students. The difference now is it's much easier to cheat. So as the teachers, we need to step up our game to make our assessments more engaging. So for students, it's easier to and more fun and more engaging to just do the assessment than to cheat. Because most students, they do not want to cheat in the end. You know, they are here, they do your course because they want to learn something new. So we want, in the end goal here is we want to aim to make it easier to do the assignment than to cheat. And there are several ways where we can do this. So the first one here is to provide students with low stakes formative assignments. So formative assignments are ungraded assignments that are very easy to just do, and where the real objective is just to learn something. What happens with this is that it doesn't matter if you use, like if you cheat or not, like you don't gain anything from it. The only objective is to learn here. within these assignments, we really want to give students instant and engaging feedback to motivate them. So if they have to wait long for you to manually give them feedback, that's probably not going to help this process. And it also won't allow you to give many of these low stakes assignments. Other strategies we can employ here are group assignments. If they have to work together, it's generally less likely that they will cheat. We can do things like code discussions, like ask them questions about the code, or whether you use like a platform for that, or you do that in person, like whenever they write maybe their bigger summative assignments. Next to the low stakes assignments, you ask them to explain it to you. Of course, they can use ChatGPT in some way to explain it, but especially if you do it in a lab setting, like just having them explain what they did is useful. And then you can combine this with more locked down summative assessments. So more moments where students cannot use ChatGPT or other tools to cheat, where they have to use the skills that they learned in those low stakes formative assignments, and where they also got to use, got to gain sort of skill how to work with the platform. And you can do this in person, in like a lab session where you lock down everything. You use proctoring tools like Lockdown Browser for this. And many universities will have platforms in place to do these kinds of things. If you use some of these strategies, it will get a lot more difficult for students to cheat. So let's see how, oh yeah, and then finally like an oral assessment, as I mentioned before. Let's take a look at some of these things in more detail. So low stakes formative assessments, ungraded tasks, no deadline, really make the focus on learning. So you can see here we have just a couple of assignments right here. Instant feedback is very important here. So maybe provide them in those formative assignments with a built-in editor, and then use some kind of auto grader to run it, and where they can get the feedback instantly. And then code discussions, you can do this in person or like this via like a platform where they can explain their code via inline comments. Finally, then let's look at some more advanced courses. So again, here we want to embrace generative AI more instead of using a lot of strategies against it. Again, of course, some of the strategies just mentioned, they will also work here in those advanced courses, like more summative assignments. But typically, your assignments will be a lot bigger, so doing low stakes formative assessment might be a lot more difficult. So in the end, as mentioned before, ChatGPT does not differ that much from traditional ways of solving an assignment with using Google and Stack Overflow, etc. And most students want to learn in the end. So the goal here is that we want students to do the computational thinking, and ChatGPT can take over that step of them putting stuff into Google, figuring it out, and putting it in their assignment. But then students, you want to give them assignments where students will still need to have the computational thinking to solve more advanced assignments. And they will also need to write like a prompt and guide ChatGPT to come up with the right solution. So you can use some strategies to embrace it or to limit sort of the use of it. And we'll show some of these in the demo soon as well. So the first one is inexplicit requirements. So don't give the students all of the requirements at once, but sort of give them on the go in multiple attempts. And it also links over to this progressive code assignments, where they have to first solve a step before they get the description and the things of the next step. So they really have to do it step by step, and you sort of, the students that just do everything just before the deadline, they will be punished by this kind of approach. And you can give bigger assignments to students where they can use ChatGPT, because they will be able to code a lot more and a lot faster. So you give them bigger assignments and make it sort of the goal to start using this tool because later on, whenever they go to their careers, they will have access to these tools as well, and they want to use those tools as well. They want to install GitHub Copilot, or they want to use ChatGPT to help them solve big problems. So a quick example here of sort of inexplicit requirements in assignments. So we just give them a very bare bones assignment description, and then as soon as they hand something in, we give them more requirements at that point. So like you miss an edge case, you missed input handling here. So ChatGPT cannot solve that immediately, but they have to go through the write code, submit, get feedback loop first. But let me go into a demo of sort of how this looks at a bigger scale. So what I have here, I'm in Canvas now, and most learning management systems have these features built in where you just unlock the next step of an assignment only before you finish the previous one. So here we have set up like a progressive code assignment with 3 steps. So we start out with a basic linked list that they have to implement. Then they have to add more functionality to that, make it a doubly linked list. And then finally, they have to implement bubble sort with this linked list. So it's not that we give them the full assignment description all at once. I cannot click on anything else, but I can only click on this basic linked list. And then what we do in this assignment, we'll give students an assignment description right here. In this first part, you will create a basic linked list where they have to create a couple of methods, and they have to add a main method to test it. So this is also quite bare bones. ChatGPT can help you with this, but it's also quite easy to just do it yourself. So let me start from a template. So this is sort of what I start with, just an empty Java class. And then as a student, I can write my code in this. So let me do that. Wrote some code in it. I can run this quickly to see if it works. But the goal here is for the student that we can give them feedback immediately. So we have here quite a simple implementation here of a linked list. We can hand this in. And now we'll get immediate feedback on the code that we implement. So we check, did you implement a node class, be it a constructor, did you implement a toString method, which we didn't do yet. So we want to add that. And it was actually not part of the initial assignment description requirements yet. So this is also an example of sort of implicit requirements. But we get some points for this, and we can improve this on the way. So you can see this right here. Once it's done running, we also run some code quality checking here. But basically, we immediately scored 68%, and this means we have more than 60%. So this unlocks the next step of this assignment. Of course, as a student, the goal here is, to be able to get feedback really fast. So it's a lot easier to just spend the time in doing the actual assignment and learning it instead of cheating. So I can now go to the next step where we add more functionality. You can see I get a grade item, and now a new assignment description has become available. So only now I get prompted that we have to add some more functionality to the linked list, and we're going to transform it to a doubly linked list. So we're going to add a prepend method, a head method, and a swap method. The important thing that we're doing here as well is we make the students change existing methods of what they just did. So if they simply start out with sort of this step and do that in the first assignment, they will get a lot less points. But if they just hand in the first assignment here, they won't be able to figure that out. They have to change sort of things all over the code. So that's another strategy to make sure that it's harder for them to sort of cheat their way into this assignment. So again, I can just create a submission here. I can start from what I did previously. And sort of let's add the new assignment. Let's add part 2. So again, I can change all of the code right here to the new one. And if you compare this code to the previous part, you will see that I've changed stuff in a lot of methods that were completed in the previous part of the assignment. So again, once I hand this in, we will have automatic immediate tests again for this particular assignment, but some more and some different ones because the requirements have changed now in the second part of the assignment. So hopefully we get a good grade here again, and that if we get a good grade here, it will unlock the next one. So again, we can take a look at some of these things. It's all running. There's a lot of sort of, because this is a sort of a Java object-oriented programming kind of assignment, there's a lot of code structure tests. So just checking, you know, did you implement this method? Did you do this in the method? And then a lot of unit testing, because that's also what we do. So again, now we get 85% for the second part of the assignment, and that means the third part is unlocked automatically. So now I can press this next button, and that will actually unlock the final part, which is sorting. So the original goal for this particular assignment in the beginning, before we transformed this into a progressive assignment, was that it just did like sorting with a linked list, and that's very easy for students to just, you know, either just find online and they can just plop it in, but now they sort of are taken through the different steps to get to that. So instead of having one big assignment, we split this up in 3 smaller parts that are all slightly different and sort of slightly change things. So again, if we look at the code here, it's now a little bit bigger. We're just over 100 lines. And there has been stuff changed all over. So what we can do now again is we can go to the next step, and we can go into sorting. And now this assignment description is available. And again, it's really small, so we don't want to give them too much information here. So we want to add a sort method using the bubble sort algorithm and the previously made swap method to swap nodes. So again, we can do this and open this up and then put in the code and submit this. So again, now it's running similar tests again, but now if we look at the actual code, now there should be a sorting function in here, which is the final part of this assignment using bubble sort. And again, students will get feedback instantly and a grade instantly, and this will finish sort of the overall assignments. And of course, in the gradebook, you can also do things here where the first 2 parts are a very small amount, and then only like step 3 gives like the majority of the grade of this assignment, to sort of further make sure that students sort of go through the steps of handing in different parts of the assignment, and also having sort of a test-driven workflow where not all of the requirements are mentioned before, but they sort of work with an auto grader to get more requirements out of it. And again, we get 84% because we have net grade style here. All right, so that's an example of a progressive code assignment. Then the other thing that you can do as well is an assignment where students should debug ChatGPT. So sort of where you really embrace assignments. So that's another assignment we created right here. So if I load that up as a student and submit this, let's look at the description. So this is sort of a bigger assignment where they have to, they start actually with a template from what ChatGPT generated. The assignment really is we gave them the prompt, please generate Python script, and this is what they got. And then their goal is to improve this. So if we open up the editor right here, this is what ChatGPT generated based on the prompt. And they can also test it out themselves, but if you already give this to them, then they don't have to run it. And then if we hand this in, we've created some additional tests where, you know, ChatGPT missed an edge case, missed input handling, and then it's up to the student to improve that. So that's also a nice way to more embrace it into your course and get students excited about what this can do, but also educate them about, you know, the limitations of a system like that. So as a student, we now want to edit it and add input handling, and maybe change this into not using a list, but just yielding stuff. But this is also a great way, maybe at the end of your introduction course, where you add something to sort of educate them that it's really not that useful per se, but if you use it, be cautioned that what it generates is not necessarily very correct. So let's go to the next part then. Great, students can use ChatGPT, but there's things we can do to sort of bypass it in some way or to embrace it. But how about using generative AI for yourself? So first of all, for your students, there's some sort of free resources available on AI literacy already that I wanted to quickly highlight. So for sort of K-12, there's this daily curriculum from MIT that you can incorporate into your course. And also the University of Helsinki has like an element of AI thing. So there's definitely something you want to do with AI literacy in your programs or in your courses. There's amazing online resources available, of course. And of course, this debug AI assignment that we just showcased is also a way of incorporating some AI literacy into your course. But now let's have a look at how you can use AI tools to sort of make your own workflow easier. So what I want to quickly showcase is how we can use ChatGPT to set up auto grading, and then I'll let Nick showcase how you can use ChatGPT to grade, which is really cool. So first a bit about the prompts. It's really quite easy to do this, but in a prompt you want to define like the programming language you do. You want to define like the technology, and then you want to write like a concise description without room for interpretation. So with some examples here, like things that are always really difficult to do, I find if I'm setting up some automatic tests, and I want to use like a regular expression, like writing rejects is just difficult, I think. So let's have ChatGPT do that. Or get started with some unit tests. ChatGPT is great at writing unit tests from a solution, so you can do that as well. So let's do this then. So let's generate some unit tests with ChatGPT and see how it does with that. So here an example. So what I did in ChatGPT here is I wanted to write a PyTest unit test to test all functions in this Python script. So I give it a solution right here that my students should do. And then I ask it to write unit tests. And what it does here is it writes unit tests. So great. So what I can do now in my auto grading assignment, in this case, of course, our platform, if I create a new assignment, I can use this to automatically test students. So let me quickly create a new assignment right here. ChatGPT. And let's use this to create some unit tests automatically. All right, so what I can do is I can go to this auto grader setup, and I can set up some automatic tests. So let's make this a Python assignment quickly. And then I can just literally copy this code and then paste it in. And then the only thing I really want to change here is how I want to import the passport. So students probably hand in something like passport.py, so I can do from passport import passport. And then the only thing I have to do is launch this to my students. So let's test if this works. And I should have a passport.py right here. And let's see if we can get something to work here. To type this, of course, not very difficult, but it takes a bit of time. So if I can do this automatically, that really helps me. And similar here, while we do that, I also want to, test this. If we look at the code, I want to test if the string they output is correct. But of course, students are different names and born different dates. So regex works great. So I've asked it to write a Python regex to parse if the text is in the following format. And then I give it a prompt like with X being any name and this the date. And then it gives me a regex right here. So what I can do then in my assignment. So you can see this actually works great. I can also create like an input-output test with a match, where I run Python 3 export by, and then I think it asks for the name. Let's quickly have a look at the submission right here, how it works. Oh, it doesn't even do that. It's hard-coded, great. So you don't even have to give it input. So this should work. And then with any student name, this should also work, hopefully. So again, we'll wait for the automatic PyTest. And of course, how more difficult your assignment is, how far you can go with this. You can see this also works. So the output of the program was this password belongs to Devin with his birth date, and it matches this pattern. So really, if you are setting up lots of tests, this can really help you at least get some, all the base cases. And of course, I can just talk to ChatGPT and let it create more things. Of course, we can use the same thing to test our automatic test as well. Let it create incorrect solutions and stuff like that. But what's even more cool is what Nick did. He was assistant professor of machine learning and data science at Erasmus University of Rotterdam. Is use ChatGPT as your future TA. So I want to hand it off to Nick so he can showcase what he can do with it.
Excellent. Okay, so I was approached a few days ago, so I showed a little bit what I've been doing with ChatGPT, and then I was asked if I could also tell a bit about what I've been doing. So this will be about grading with ChatGPT. And let me give you some context. So the task that I had was that I recently had an introduction to programming exam. And the exam was sort of open text questions, some theory questions, and also some programming questions in Java. So Java Introduction to Programming course. This course was about 2 hours. It was closed off, so the students did not have access to ChatGPT. So it was actually their own code that they handed in there. And it was taken by about 400 students. And it was graded by TAs who use autotests as inputs. It's a setup I use for my exams. And while the TAs were busy grading, and have an army of about 15 TAs who grade this for me, I was thinking about, oh, can I somehow use ChatGPT here to help? So, well, the main idea I had was, oh, can I sort of grade the entire exam with ChatGPT? But I've had some experience with that, but it seems to be unreliable for now. Though, of course, we shouldn't put the bars too high. Grading ourselves or with TAs is also not perfectly reliable. Humans also make big mistakes. Some intermediate ideas that I have so far that, well, maybe you can grade with ChatGPT and then use that as input for human grading. Or maybe having graded by a TA or by me and then verifying with ChatGPT if I miss anything. Yes, those are some ideas that are definitely feasible at the moment, I think. And I'll show you some things in a moment. Or maybe doing both of these. So first, have ChatGPT grade the exam, and then have a human look at it manually, and then again verifying on top of that. Okay, so my progress in this so far is not finished yet. I haven't actually graded the entire exam of ChatGPT yet, but I've done quite a bit of experiments, and I want to run it soon. So overall, what I found is sort of plain use of ChatGPT is pretty bad. So if you just use like the website chat.openai.com, if you just sort of paste in there, especially if you use the free version, things are not very good. It's quite time intensive to do. You have to copy paste in all these student answers and what the question was, etc. And the memory is quite limited. It remembers about 4,000 words approximately. So, well, it starts forgetting things, and it becomes pretty difficult to work with. And overall, the quality is also quite mediocre and inconsistent. But recently, I got access to the GPT-4 API, which allows, which gives much better results. So first of all, using the API calls, I can simply just run ChatGPT inside a script that I wrote myself. So I can sort of write a script that runs over all these students' codes and throws it into GPT automatically. Using the API, you have access to system message instructions, which are instructions that ChatGPT listens to much more carefully. So if you just chat with ChatGPT, it doesn't, well, of course, it listens to what you say, but if you have a system message, it listens much more carefully, and it will abide your instructions much more carefully. And overall, I find that the quality is also much better. It's much better at detecting mistakes in code and those kind of things as well. There's a downside of using the API, namely that it's, well, it's not super expensive, but it is costly. I estimate the costs at the moment for my current setup to be about €1 per student per exam. So if you've got about 400 students, that will be about €400, which is a lot cheaper than grading it yourself or grading with TAs. But if you make mistakes, you have to do this many times, it can become relatively expensive. So you should test it a lot before you do something like this. So that's what I did. I took 3 students that I happened to have graded myself, and I used those students to their exams and their results to sort of fine-tune the process and see how far I can get with this. And I'll show you the ideas and results that I have so far. So my setup so far requires quite a lot of so-called prompt engineering, so sort of very careful instructions of exactly what you want ChatGPT to do for you. And the main component of it is the system message that I set up. And in the system message, what I put in there is general grading instructions. I'll show you in a moment what my general grading instructions are so far. Question-specific instructions, so maybe some specifics about this question, what it should be extra careful about. The question itself, I also put it in a system message. Like, hey, this is the question. I give a reference answer and an output format. So I wanted to give feedback and points in a certain output format, so that I can then use regular expressions to extract the points and the feedback easily from the output format. So one issue with ChatGPT is that if you ask it for the same question twice, its output is very different. The output format is very different. So you have to be very careful in instructing it a certain format. Otherwise, you have to somehow extract these points and this feedback from the response message that you get, which is quite difficult. So instructing the output format really helps here. And what I've been experimenting with more recently is also pre-appending the chat. So in the API, beyond sending a system message with sort of like instructions that it has before the chat starts, you can also already put some part of the conversation. You can already sort of like fix into the system before the actual chat starts. So what I did, I already gave it an example of a student answer, which I sort of crafted a little bit that it has some nasty mistakes. And I also gave an example of a desired output on the student answer, so how much points I would want it to give and what kind of errors, how it should handle those errors that the student made, in order to, well, even help a little bit further to grade here. But even without this pre-appending of the chat, just a system message works pretty well, but this makes it even a little bit better. So let me show you what kind of instructions I give ChatGPT. So first of all, so here you can see, first of all, I instructed first line that it is an expert teacher in the grading introduction to programming exam. This is very important. If you don't tell it's an expert, actually it won't behave like an expert. So telling it that it's an expert is actually very important. I give it some more, tell it what it's being given, so the grading instructions, the question, etc. I give it a task, so I want to give short textual feedback. I'll later give the format as well. This is very important, I wanted to deliberate about the points before it actually gives the points. This makes the quality much better as well. And more instructions about the students have limited time for the exam, so typos and small errors are not important, or things that a point should be allocated based on whether a student did a good attempt at a question. So if you don't give these instructions, in my experience, ChatGPT becomes very nitpicky. It starts picking out lots of small details and start punishing the students very harshly for these small details. So I had to come up with a lot of instructions that seem to work fine. And so far, this works pretty well. So let me show you an example of a student answer that I have. So one of the questions on the most recent exam was to find the second largest number on an array of integers. And this is an answer the student gave. And there's 2 errors in this code. I won't really go into depth about it, but here the second largest number is initialized in an unfortunate way, which in some edge cases can cause issues. And also the strict inequality here should be a weak inequality. Or actually, you can never actually remove the entire second component there. It's completely unnecessary. Yes, the second largest wrongly initialized and the super fluent comparison there on the right. Okay, so then I fed this to GPT, and well, let's look at the type of feedback that it gives here. So first of all, it says, well, good job, overall approach. You can see the output structure that I asked for you. So first I asked for feedback, then for point deliberation here in blue, and then finally I asked for the points. And you can see here at the two red arrows that as a second bullet point here, it says that, oh, you initialize the largest and second largest numbers to be equal to the first element of the array, and this can cause issues, with some explanation of why this can cause issues, which is exactly the first error that I pointed out there at the top in the student code. And the third bullet point here, we can see that in an oh, okay, let me put my mouse here. In an if-else statement, well, this the second error, it also finds that second error, and it says that you might want to give some feedback around it as well. And then finally, it gives a point deliberation. It explains, well, what happened here and what the feedback was, and sort of summarizes it, and then deliberates by the points and decides to give 3 points out of 4 points. So overall, it identifies that the idea of the code is correct. The overall approach of the code seems to work pretty well. It identifies both the errors that the student made, and it turns out these 3 points are exactly the number of points that I'd already given as well. So I graded these students myself before I started using ChatGPT, and I also happened to give 3 points to this exact student as well. Okay, so some more findings so far. So overall, I've been quite impressed. I don't have time to show you many more examples, but I'll summarize some things. So overall, it's able to deal with answers that have very serious issues. So one interesting example is that I had one student who answered question 1A and question B, both under question 1A. But ChatGPT had no issue with this whatsoever. And so it just identified that part of the answer was actually an answer to part 1B, and without any mention, it just graded it. It can also deal with code that does not compile at all, and this is, well, a big improvement compared to unit tests in some sense. Of course, a unit test is more intricate. You can test, well, more specific things with that, and it's more reliable. But I had some situations where students handed in some code. They only had 2 hours for the exam, so some of them got a bit of stress, and they handed in some code that didn't compile, and there were lots of strange issues in the code. But GPT was still able to sort of see that the overall idea of the code was pretty good, so they still got partial credit for the question. I can deal with very creative solutions, but some students had very strange solutions, but apparently it was able to identify that it is actually a correct approach and that it does seem to work. And also, of course, it's also important that it doesn't give full points for everything. It's also very capable of giving very low points for long nonsense answers. And some students like to give sometimes. If they've got no idea what the answer is, they just start writing something. And ChatGPT has no issue with saying, well, it's just nonsense. You get 0 points for this. Also, there's no issue with answers in a different language. So my exam was half of it was in English, and for the other half of the students took the course in Dutch. It could also handle that. Also more findings. So overall, it's quite some work to instruct it properly. Well, with some experience, it becomes a lot easier, but to figure out how to do it in a proper way, that took me quite a bit of work, a few days of prompt engineering. But now I think I've got this workflow that I showed you that seems to work pretty well. And some issues that I encountered are that, for example, it punished students pretty hardly for continuation errors. So I had some situations where part B depended on part A, but I told the students you could just make part B without making part A, and just call the function that you should have made in a part A, just call it in your part B. And for some reason, ChatGPT kept punishing the student, even if I explicitly told it not to. But well, with some extra, making this a little bit more explicit and adding to the question-specific instructions that this should not happen, eventually this was possible to resolve this. And also I noticed that it's overly harsh on style sometimes, even if I explicitly say it, that does not matter. So you have to be really explicit about these things sometimes. So fine-tuning this is quite a bit of effort. So you can't just say, oh, these are the questions, these are the answers, and just feed all the students exams to it. It doesn't really know what you want it to do, so it will be very harsh sometimes on things that you don't want it to be harsh on. So maybe that type of calibration is the most difficult thing. But overall, I've been able to resolve all these issues that I had so far. So what's next? So I'm currently still working on fine-tuning this further, and then my plan is to run it on all 400 students that took the exam. and then eventually compare the grading quality to how the TAs grade it, and see if it at least somewhat corresponds to what they had, and then proceed from there on, and next year hopefully use it in the actual grading process as well.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was really awesome, and thanks also for giving more information about the prompt engineering, and really cool. So that brings us to the end of today's webinar. So we have a couple of minutes left. I already saw lots of people chatting in the chat, but of course, if you have any other questions or things, feel free to also send us an email. And then I want to thank everyone. We'll be here a couple more minutes. If you have any questions, just feel free to pop it in the chat, and then we can talk about it. Or if you have any other questions for Nick as well, we have a couple more minutes left. But I want to thank everyone already for attending now, and I hope to see you in a new one soon as well.